Charlie Booker and Annabelle Jones' dystopian anthology series Black Mirror has run for 5 seasons since 2011. Each episode takes place in a possible near future, and consequently a strong thematic trend within the award-winning series has been a preoccupation with technology and its impact on humanity. In Season 2's White Christmas, for example, the potential of the electronic personal assistant, such as Amazon's Alexa or Apple's Siri, is explored through a world where biotechnology has facilitated a process whereby an individual's thoughts and experiences can be copied and stored in a chip that is consciousness. Ultimately, like many episodes of Black Mirror, White Christmas offers a stark warning to viewers of both the pleasures and dangers of technology and the possible directions it may take our lives. Season 3's San Junipero, therefore, represents something of a narratological departure for Booker and Jones. The episode begins in 1987 as 20-something Yorkie pulls up to Tucker's nightclub and finds her apparent soulmate in a chance meeting with the eminently more confident Kelly. Their relationship flourishes with their regular encounters in San Junipero, but we gradually come to realize that all is not what it seems. Kelly, for example, confides to Yorkie that she was married while she appears far too young to have experienced the life-changing event to which she refers. Ultimately, we learn that San Junipero is a kind of fantasy love island residing on a server where Kelly and Yorkie have been afforded limited weekly access.
One night, she's 21, comes out to her folks. They're a little uptight about it, you might say. Tell her they don't want a gay daughter, it's not natural, and so forth. They fight, she gets in her car, runs it off the road, boom.
When she was 21?
Mm-hmm. More than 40 years back. It's been her whole lifetime, basically.
Like Jennifer Hadey's play, The Nether, the virtual world is one in which society's social and ethical concerns are made even more complex and multi-layered. Both Kelly and Yorkie are old and close to death. San Junipero, in a sense, represents a place of their lost youth, what might have been if they'd been braver about their sexuality when they were young. However, San Junipero also provides them with an opportunity to live on beyond their depths. In this version of a Black Mirror future, human consciousness can persist beyond the confines of bodies that have become worn out and diseased by the years. So, the dilemma for Yorkie and Kelly is whether to take the plunge and opt for a digital life in San Junipero, where they can live on in an accepting world, where unlike the Belinda Carlisle track that plays when Yorkie first gets out of her car at the opening of the episode, heaven is not just a place on earth, but persists in a post-life, post-human world. San Junipero may sit somewhat uncomfortably within the Black Mirror corpus as a more optimistic take on our post-human future. As such, it provokes questions for us about the potentiality of the digital space to become a portal for a new kind of liberalism that in some senses seeks to put right the constraints and dogma of society's mores. But questions still remain. Who, for example, owns the servers and limits humans' access to them while they are still living sentient beings? What are the power relations that take place at the Quagmire, the nearby apparently S&M neighbouring club to Tucker's in San Junipero? And what happens if and when Kelly and Yorkie finally tire of the pleasures of San Junipero and seek to move on elsewhere, or just simply die? These questions bring to the fore the future of liberalism in a post-human, post-capitalist society and require new thinking and new answers.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming here. I am honored, really, in your presence here. So first, a little bit of housekeeping. Fire exit on both of my side. If you go out from this side, you would see the staircase right in front of you, and then you would go up and right. and then if you use this door, there's a corridor. You would go back to the corridor and then go up from the stairs and then go right. There will be fire wardens to guide you, hopefully. But, okay, so let's get to it. I would just quickly introduce our speaker. So I'll start from Professor Mark Thomas. Mark here is Pro Vice Chancellor at the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Sciences. He is at University of Greenwich. So formerly, he was Dean of Academic Affairs at Newcastle University and founding director of Institute of Performing Arts at the University of East London. Mark has also spent 10 years in BBC as a subtitler and also as a channel director. But interesting part is that his work is actually creating a way forward in valuing creativity and arts in social institutes so that our future generations can have a vivid freedom of expression. So please welcome Mark. Thank you. Now Satinder Gill. Satinder, she is a researcher from Center for Music and Science at University of Cambridge and also an associate editor for AI and Society, which is a journal of knowledge, culture and communication. Thank you. And she's also an author of a book called Tacit Engagement. But now this one is, she has been a research scientist with Advanced Telecommunication Research Institute in Japan. She has also held a joint position at, well, it is a joint position at Center for Knowledge and Innovation Research in Finland and also Center for the Study of Language and Information at Stanford University. But her interdisciplinary research actually concerns with the rhythm and human communication. But the interesting part is that her excitement and her enthusiasms somehow brings life to these subtle ideas, and that is a delight to watch. So please welcome Satinder. Now we move on to Alan. Alan Loki is the head of Future Work Center and associate director of Economy, Enterprise and Manufacturing team at Royal Society of Arts. Before RSA, Alan was a research director at a think tank, Demos, and was the Labour Party's senior advisor for education policy for 2015 general elections. Earlier this year, RSA launched their research for the future of work, and as hard it is to actually predict future, it's sometimes even harder to understand what that actually means for our society. But Alan's ability to bring clarity to such conversation is just an invaluable resource for us. So please welcome Alan Loki. And then we move on to our final speaker, Glenn Boddington. She's a reader here in School of Design at University of Greenwich. She's also a co-founder and a creative director of Body Data Space, and an interactive creative design collective. They have been advocating for the living body at the heart of digital debate since 1990. So that's why Glenn's insight into range of topics like identity, self, also how the personal data should be used, and especially her work where she focuses on blurring the boundaries between our physical bodies and virtual bodies, always somehow evoke ideas of transcendence. So please welcome Glenn Boddington. Now I will pass it on to Mark. Please, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel like you've already heard quite enough from me already with the opening montage. I think it's so great to see so many people here that are interested in this topic today. So you're all very welcome, and it's great to see sort of the different, sort of the wide audience that we have, from students to people that work here at the university and other people that perhaps live locally or RSA fellows living in London. I think it's an evening of firsts for us as the University of Greenwich and as the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and that we planned to do 3 events this year around the future of liberalism, and this is the first one. It's also the first time, I think, where we've tried to bridge that gap between a shared context like a film or a TV program that everyone, we hope, has had the opportunity to see in advance, and to engage with some more theoretical ideas around what that might mean, in this case, obviously, in terms of posthumanism and the future. And then finally, I think it's a first for us in the sense that it's the first time that we've partnered with the Royal Society of Arts on an event like this. And as I said, we are planning 2 future events with the RSA as well, and that's really important for us. I think we share lots of goals and ambitions with the RSA, and perhaps it's just worth me saying a couple of things for those of you who don't know an awful lot about what the RSA is and what it does. So the RSA has a long history, it dates back I think 260 years, was founded in 1754, I think, in London by a guy called William Shipley, who very much sort of reimagining the earlier sort of 16th century and 15th century idea of the Italian salon, where people would come and sort of cafes and explore ideas. He set up a society of arts at Rothmell's Cafe in central London. And it was really a place for designers like him. He was a designer, very apt that we're in the School of Design, to come and share ideas about how their creativity and ideas could create a better future. So it's the origins of the RSA was always founded on an idea around social change, and that's always been very important to the RSA. And they would give prizes to people that came up with great new ideas around innovation, etc. And obviously, through the centuries, the RSA has evolved and changed an organisation, but it still remained very faithful to that idea. And what's so important about the RSA is that it's comprised of its fellows. So people like us that are sitting here today are RSA fellows, but it's an inclusive organisation. And I think one of the original intentions that we had for an evening like this was, and you'll know that Kavla is outside from the RSA who works in the fellowship team, is that if you're interested in finding out more about the RSA and what it can do for you and what you might be able to do for the RSA, we'd be very happy for you to have that conversation, to perhaps become a fellow yourself. And I know that there's a membership fee, and sometimes, particularly if you're a student and you're thinking, oh, there's no way I could afford to become a member of the RSA, although I'd love to go to the house and have access to the club and meet other members and engage in this wonderful platform for your own creativity. So what we'd like to do is, if you're a Greenwich student, through Louise's Office for Undergraduate Research, whether you're an undergraduate or a postgraduate student, we will be offering a number of bursaries to support our students to become fellows of the RSA, if that's what you're interested in doing. And I feel a bit like Boris Johnson talking about levelling up from, but for us, that's awful allusion. But yeah, it's very much about trying to provide you with that kind of further opportunity. And even if you're not a student and you would still like to, and you're perhaps a member of the public or a member of staff, and you'd still like to engage with the RSA and become a fellow, it's still worth talking to Kavla about how we might help that happen as an institution. So that's really, I think the programs of work in the RSA are really important, and a number of the events that we have coming up will resonate with that. So we're hoping to do one, for example, in the future around fashion, and we're hoping to do one more centred on sort of political liberalism and what that might mean whatever, if we ever get to a post-Brexit phase, hopefully not, but if we do, what that could mean for that. So those are, and the other thing we want to do is, in the 3 events, is to change the form of the event. So we're aware that this is kind of quite a formal setup that particularly academics might be quite used to. A panel, a bit like Question Time, a panel of so-called experts come and bestow on you their unique knowledge and insights. So this is not going to be the form of the future talks. We're going to experiment and find different ways of interacting with you as an audience at those future events. So we will trial 3 different approaches to having this sort of public conversation with you in different ways. So that was really
Perfect.
about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Brilliant. Alan, would you like to add something about the collaboration, or if you have anything?
No, I haven't really prepared anything on that, and I've only been at the RSA for about 4 months. But what I would say is, come down to Embankment, come down to RSA House, which is on John Adams Street. Actually, today would have been a bit difficult because they've Benedict Cumberbatch and the film company have commandeered the entire street, and they're filming with cats, and I have no idea what the hell is going on. But if you, other than this week, when the filming isn't taking place, come and have a little look round. And the building of the RSA really tells the story of the RSA and the kind of transformative social innovations from, you know, Charles Darwin was a member, Karl Marx was a member, a fellow even. You know, we invented a chimney sweep in the early 19th century which took thousands of children out of child labour. We invented the blue plaque. Anytime you see a blue plaque in London, that is an RSA invention. And the building, which you're all free to take a little short tour around, particularly if you speak to our fellowship team at the top, really tells the story and the history of the transformation that we've achieved in British and global society throughout the centuries. So yeah, come and have a look round. That's all I'd say.
Brilliant, thank you. So Mark, I would first like to start from you, because an important part of this conversation initiated from one of the papers you wrote about translation in post-human, post-global world. So what does liberalism mean in our present time, and what are the consequences and the scenarios you see in that probable future?
Okay, well, that's an enormous question, which I don't think I can do justice to in 5 or 10 minutes or even longer. But I guess we could go back to the paper that I originally wrote around this was very much thinking about actually the future of work and the impact that was having on the translation, which is another kind of profession that I have. So for a number of years I've worked in translation, translating Portuguese into English for the stage. And so literary translation is a kind of subset of translation, which is when I first started out, nobody would even use any kind of technology at all. In fact, if you did need a dictionary, you were kind of seen as having failed to some extent, because as a translator you expected to just own each of the languages that you had, and that was part of your power to translate, would be that instant recall that you would have. And obviously translators, particularly literary translators, have used tools like dictionaries, thesauruses, and access to their sort of source cultures in different ways over the years. But what's happened is there's been a complete revolution in translation now, so far that no translator would really get a job these days unless they could show competency in translation technologies. I mean, you wouldn't even get an interview. You would be expected to be able to demonstrate that you have a high level of competence in the various translation softwares that are available. And that's been the case for sort of more technical translation for a few years now, but it's fast becoming the case even in literary translation as well, because it speeds up the process so much, and the kind of translation tools that are available has really completely revolutionized the process of translation. So this really got me thinking about that and how far we might go along the lines, how far we could push that notion of literary translation, so that machine translation, as it's called, you know, when you go onto Google Translate, you put in a chunk of text and out comes the other side, translation of any language now that you might be able to think of, you can do that pretty. And we all know that the accuracy of those things is often laughable, particularly, you know, those of us in the sort of target language would often. But what's happened is over the years is the accuracy has exponentially got better and better. And this is obviously as machine learning, so machines that actually can learn from their mistakes has developed the technology. So it's a bit like AI, it becomes a learning tool in and of itself. it's become more and more sophisticated. So I first became aware of this in my industry when I would get literary departments ringing me up saying, oh, we've received a play in Portuguese, you know, and we've run it through the translator, so we kind of already know what the plot is, whereas this would never have happened before. I would have been asked to write them a report, you know, a kind of first report detailing what the plot was and what my first thoughts was on the sort of validity of a production for the script. And that was quite quickly, just that work for me was disappearing, and I was being brought in at a much later stage. And actually, Ghislaine sent me something the other day about a company in Portugal who are working with human translators as a way of sort of finessing that final stage. So it's really become translation now is more of a post-editing industry as opposed to a first editing industry that it began when I started working here. And so I wrote this paper very much based on that and what it might mean for the future. And the ways in which translation, you could, as a translator, you can start to have a relationship with a machine. So it could learn your way of translating. And so if I worked with a machine translation tool for long enough, it would be able to predict the way in which the lexical sets that I have in my head for translating certain clusters of words, it would be able to come up with a Marco Thomas translation of something which would be unthinkable before. And then you can think about when the day comes that I die, you could have a kind of post-human translation that could be accredited to my name, even though I'm no longer actually involved in that work, that the machine could continue to replicate that. So for me, that was a fascinating idea. Although the article really ends at the point a bit like where I tried to end that sort of short film essay, really trying to unpick what the power relations are in that, and this is where we get into this sort of complicated notion of what liberalism is and what it really means. Does it really, you know, often these days, particularly in the US, liberalism is invoked as a kind of moniker for as a sort of pejorative critique of I guess social liberalism, meaning about, you know, the welfare state or whatever. But we all know that liberalism has had a much more murkier past than that. And you know, we can go back to John Locke and his relationship with slavery, for example. On the one hand, you're talking about freedoms, and on the other hand, kind of having a monetary investment in something that could be seen as being anti-liberal. So it's a very complicated area that I would leave perhaps for other people to investigate further, but that's really where I was coming from in it.
Brilliant. Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Satinder, so complicated beings. As Mark was mentioning just now, that how translation somehow in this era we are going forward to might be more complications. So now you talk about communication. I think it would be perfect to hear from you how you think about these scenarios.
Yes, I think this was quite an interesting scenario for me, watching this movie and thinking about it. And I suppose I will start from where you introduced me in thinking in why I'm so interested in rhythm within human communication. Maybe that's an entry point. Okay, so when I began doing my research, I was looking at how we form ideas and concepts in communication, what influences them, questioning conceptions of data, what is data, questioning the idea of data residing in a head, and reflecting instead and doing empirical work that demonstrated that in fact the life of data resides within the complexity of the information and how we're communicating it. So there's no such thing as a straight line of going from A to B and solving a problem. You have all these meanderings and possibilities, and out of them something interesting emerges. And it's not predictable. That's the beauty of it. And at any point, any person can hold the key to the difficulties or misunderstandings that we're having in a communication situation. You cannot identify one person as being a mediator in a group. Anybody can take that role, and it can happen anybody can take it at any time within seconds. So I was fascinated by this complexity of information. And then I had the experience of going to Japan, where I didn't speak Japanese before I went, probably not wise, and I learnt on the spot while I was there. But I faced a very interesting experience that every day I had to try and figure out how to be able to make myself understood and make sure that I was behaving in polite ways in the way I move through a space without talking, because a lot can happen how you move through a space and how somebody can perceive you and misunderstand you or understand you. Simply the way I walked in relationship to how another person walks, and how I learned that you must never look directly in the eyes because that's impolite. So therefore, how do I look and know when to nod? And how do I know, by judging from the way a person is walking towards me, how they're looking, what their possible status might be, whether I bow at the right angle? So there's a huge complexity going on there. And it's not just about me as an individual, it's a whole ecology of a practice, a whole environment. And I became fascinated by this interesting matter of relationship between thought and movement of my body, and how that shapes how I am perceived and understood, and how I perceive and understand others. So rhythm, then, I became even more interested in it in relationship to human-machine interaction, because I was working with computational linguists. They were designing all these multimodal interfaces, you know, where you could just have heads nodding and moving, and they were fascinated by the movement and pitch and tonality of voice, and the relationship of this to bodies. So I found, I did some ethnographic work, and I was just fascinated by how it is that, what is it about the ways in which our bodies move shapes how we can comprehend and understand each other. I'm interested in this in relationship to this consciousness and the disembodiment. And yet you have this virtual bodies in the movie. So it's not just blobs of minds and thoughts, it's quite physical. But I'm interested in emergence and formation and transformation. And what function does rhythm play in this? And what I noticed was that when people are, it's interesting how we move in rhythm. You know, sometimes we don't move very much at all. We're not really communicating, or we're withholding. I don't really understand what you're saying, or I don't agree with you, or I'm thinking. We withhold our bodies, and then sometimes we move our bodies in. But we are not doing this arbitrarily. We are amazing in how we move. And I look at the micro level of movements, micro levels, microseconds. And what I find is that we have this amazing capacity to suddenly start, when we finally begin to connect, we do a lot of back-channeling work with our bodies. Okay, okay. We do this with the way, we have amazing ways in which we move our bodies, head nods and all sorts of things. But if we break all of this down into bits and pieces, which is what happens a lot in creating all sorts of robotics and interesting interfaces. I'm not so much interested in all of that. I'm interested in the whole effect. And what I find is that when you finally, we have this business, I should have showed you a video. You'll get a moment where you begin to move, okay, and then you have another movement, and then another movement, and it sort of crescendos, and then you move together at the same time. When people are coming from different positions or different power hierarchies, I am very interested in not the role of sameness in the synchronizing and in the rhythm, but in how it is that it allows us to express difference at exactly the same time. So, so sharing something with somebody doesn't mean that you have to have the same position as them. We cannot say that we feel the same thing as somebody else and all these other things. But what is interesting is that we can share a difference in rhythm. And I think that is, for me, one of the most beautiful things about rhythm. And we have rhythm in every, you know, all of us, when we meet somebody new for the first time, or whenever we meet somebody, we greet them. Human greeting is in every culture. It is a moment of simultaneous synchrony. It is a moment of it's simultaneous rhythm. And it's very powerful because it embodies trust, and it allows us, buys us time to, you know, evolve that trust in our communication. So it's a very powerful thing. And likewise, when you say goodbye, somehow we have to make sure that that's well coordinated, and that's not arbitrary. So I think for the movie, I'm sorry, I'm probably talking far too much. Get a bit excited. For the movie, I'm curious about your last comment, you know, about the evolution of the relationship, and then if you want to, what if you do want to die? Or where's the emergence, the evolution of my identity in relation to you? That is not clear to me what happens with all of that in this sort of virtual space. I will stop there.
Brilliant, thank you. Alan, so we just heard how the relations are complicated, how rhythms have so much nuances. RSA has launched this research about these complicated different scenarios to not to predict, but actually to create these 4 scenarios. I mean, it would be really interesting if you can give us insight into what have you found out about it and how we are proceeding about those scenarios.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and then I'll talk a little bit about the scenarios and then move on to San Junipero and the video. Although it is rather difficult to have a discussion about work in San Junipero, because as far as I'm aware, there's only one worker. So there's this one guy who has reacted to a world of unbridled hedonism and, you know, immortality, and decided to be a barman in a nightclub. He's doing, not sure what that guy, whatever get you, wherever you get your kicks, I guess.
But I think the other work in the other world, in the real world, is interesting in terms of the future of work, isn't it?
Exactly. And I also think that the example of there being no work in San Junipero is a very clever plot device, and there are a whole number of plot devices which really strip your intuitive, normative revulsion at some of the things away, so that well, some of the things you might normally react to in a scenario, because it is a kind of scenario, a bit like what we've done at the RSA, is stripped away so that Charlie Brooker wants you to focus specifically on the normative questions about what is life and death. But I'll probably come on to that. Yeah, so we've done this piece of research where we've kind of very critically, as you said, not predicted scenarios, not predicted the future of work. We kind of decided to go against the dominant research approach to thinking about work in the future, which is to kind of make a quantitative prediction about the number of jobs. We rejected that for a couple of reasons. One, because I think, you know, quantity and net jobs only tells a very, very small fraction of the story about the role that work plays in society and culture. And also, you know, I want a world where everyone has quality and flourishing jobs, not just a job. But also because humans are utterly useless at predicting the future. When we present this as a slide deck, we have a range of quotes from eminent technologists themselves that have been proven to be absolutely ludicrous, of which my favourite is the director, or the chairman, I think, of IBM in the 40s, who predicted that there would be a global market for 5 computers, which, to his great enrichment, turned out to be very, very wrong. So we have 4 scenarios. And I'll very briefly go over them. The first is the big text, actually because crucially these are all set in 2035, and so I kind of feel like, at least from the perspective of technological adoption, San Junipero is kind of slightly beyond 2035, so we're not quite there. The big tech economy is the first scenario, and these are all very extreme scenarios as well. What we're trying to do with the scenarios is provoke a reaction, primarily from policymakers, but also a response from the public, in much the way that Black Mirror is deliberately provocative, to try and force you to focus on the broader and wider lessons about humans and their interrelationship with technology. So the first is the big tech economy, which I would glibly call the robots take over scenario. That's high automation, high inequality, a continuation really of neoliberalism, in that the big tech firms both hold the power and also move into new markets, including public services. And you can see this with Google and Apple's move into healthcare, or aspirational move into healthcare. It's high inequality, it's high productivity, a really good sort of society in terms of the amount of technology and transformation that happens. You do get the driverless cars, you do get fantastic consumer services, but it's not particularly, there's no power for workers, and actually a high degree of unemployment, which, you know, would everyone sort of by force, not choice, so it's not post-work, moves into a kind of 20-hour working week. The second is the precision economy, which is an economy where you don't get the kind of big infrastructure tech projects, you don't get fast adoption, but you do, in most technologies, it's a moderate level of technological adoption, but what you do get is high levels of adoption in one particular technology or one particular field of technology, which is data capture and the Internet of Things. So really, the ability to harvest data and the economy being built around the capture and monetization of data becomes the dominant, or one of the dominant forms of production. So with that, you get a higher degree of a gig economy than we see now, because, and I was speaking to a logistics company recently who put this very practically, they are already close to being able to use precision data capture technologies to allow you to order your package from Zara or ASOS or wherever and get it delivered to a minute of your convenience. So what this will allow firms to do is to really smash down potentially the 35-hour week and really allow them to manage their labour and their production to a minute degree of precision. With that might come things like wearable technologies, which we already see in Amazon, and the ability to identify individual levels of productivity. It's kind of surveillance capitalism. It's quite scary to me, to be perfectly honest. The third scenario is the exodus economy, which is a scenario where we envisaged a sort of black swan crash. We jokingly call it, depending on your political inclination, the Brexodus economy. You know, so and in this scenario, the economy gets trapped in a similar low pay, low productivity, high austerity trap that you kind of saw in 2009. So it's very similar to the post-crash context there. What you then see in this scenario more than the other scenarios is a social response to that, and the kind of anti-capitalist resistance, both traditionally in terms of protest politics, but also in terms of a movement of people actually opting out of capitalism, deurbanization, moving out of cities, people who can afford to live off-grid in self-sufficient communities. You see a return to communes and kibbutzes, and that kind of alternative lifestyles has great attraction. And then finally is the empathy economy, which is very similar to the big tech, high-tech adoption, but in this scenario, politics, democratic forces, and or just, you know, consumer demand have forced the tech companies into a kind of more social partnership model. So in this, we do see automation managed more favourably, and we do see humans kind of carving out a role for themselves in the economy, which is based very much on emotional intelligence, caring, dexterity, high-touch jobs where there's a lot of human interaction. And we see actually jobs that don't necessarily have a massive degree of that at the moment. We've done a lot of work with the retail sector. It's obviously a little bit of a high-touch job, but we see their customer service, for example, as a role becoming even more high-touch, where they become more kind of almost like influencers, brand salespeople, and have to take on a higher degree of skills to do that. Now, I don't know what that means for San Junipero, because I guess the big question really in that scenario, I mean, there's a touch of empathy, I think, because it's almost like post-empathy in that our empathy economy envisages humans carving out a caring, really kind of carving out that role for themselves in the economy. In that scenario, we've sort of gone beyond that and managed to automate things in the caring sectors which we aren't even conceiving of at this point, to allow technology to do things that we haven't currently conceived of. But I think the big question which we ask in our scenarios, which is deliberately not asked by Charlie Brooker in this episode of Black Mirror, is the power question, really. We're very interested in who has the power in each of our scenarios. But I think quite deliberately, if you look at the world that is not San Junipero, it's quite benevolent. And so who controls the machines? I think there's little hints which suggests there's a scene where there are clear guidelines in place for how you switch off a machine or you turn someone off. And that tends to suggest that there is a rights and responsibility framework in place for who gets to go to San Junipero. And it's quite clear that the purpose of San Junipero is therapeutic. So it's not a kind of, you're not allowed to dismiss this by saying, well, oh, this is horrible because, the machines are in control, or this is horrible because what should be a caring intervention is being marketized, and that makes me feel uncomfortable. And, throughout the whole episode, really, I think whether it's the way that, whether it's the narrative of the character Yorkie, which is, not a conventional life, and we would really want her to enjoy a life that she never had through the process of San Junipero. I think Charlie Brooker is really trying to get you to focus and strip away those impulses and those intuitive reactions to the normativity of the scenario that would allow you to dismiss that and turn away from the kind of, oh my God, what is the human condition in a kind of scenario where you can live forever, at least in some kind of unreal, not necessarily ontological, secure, but feels real scenario. So he really wants you to focus on that and not think about things like power as much, I would say.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alan. So, Glenn, I mean, San Junipero, expression of different selves, as you, Alan, mentioned, that how we want Yorkie to go and live there. And I think you would be able to share a lot of slides and devices which would...
places.
Yeah, please.
Hey, great.
As Glenn set up, I just wanted to mention that after Glenn finishes, we have a lot of time for question and answers. And as Mark mentioned, that the whole point of putting this event is that so you can ask questions and we can have a conversation. So please do ask your questions. Do not hesitate. And if you have it right now, write it down so you don't forget. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, I've got some slides to share. I'm going to go through them quite fast, but I'm going to take a slightly different angle and actually look at are we ready to make a San Junipero at this point in time, and what implications that has, and if that's coming, what we've got to look at now to sort this out. So my work, as Raza introduced me, is entirely looking for 30 years actually at physical and virtual interfaces, and how I'm coming from a dance background. So it's very much about the body and how the virtual and physical body are blending, and how that's actually now really shifting our understanding of our identities. And actually those are much more diverse. We've got multiple identities. I'm sure you've all got many avatars and different places you put yourselves out there. And our collaborations are really different too. We're much more in a co-creative, collaborative scenarios and connected. So we're working at a distance too, all the time in collaborative situations. But what I think has been fascinating for me across this 30 years of research is that finally our bodies have become the interface to the technologies we're working with. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how that, and this is a slide I've been working with for 20 years, about actually how we move from the human and how we're moving through towards cyborg culture and towards avatar culture. San Junipero, we're looking at avatar culture. I'm going to talk about both and about the human's ability now to be both avatar, cyborg and human at the same time, and that multiple sides of us. So I work in a collective called Body Data Space. We work on the body and data in virtual and physical space. And this is one of our key kind of mission slides, really, looking at the physical self and the data self and how the body transmits data out. All these little dots are all the data that you transmit out, but also receives it back in. And everything on this side of a slide, actually you have already, probably in your phone even. And if it's not in your phone, you're hitting it at the airport, motion and gait, facial and iris recognition. And this side, many of them are on their way, biofeedback, you have it in your Fitbits, if you're going jogging or whatever. Smell and taste are coming fast. Touch, we know, is on its way. Haptic and feel interfaces too. And we're well on our way to the neural and the thought stuff too. We can turn this off and on. We do have a choice. We can't turn off living. We keep breathing and our hearts keep going even when we're asleep. Here we look at collective embodiment. Now, Satinder mentioned talking about embodiment, and here I'm looking at how the individual can come into the group scenario. And this for me is actually really a kind of visual slide of what San Junipero is. How you actually enter that world, you would enter with biometric data and AI, and you're actually within that world you meet others who have also entered with their biometric data and their AI, and within that you hit these many different things. Holograms, sense and tech, smart skins, gesture will all be part of how our data cells are tethered to our physical cells in a world like San Junipero. And I'm going to just give you some quick examples of where some of those are today. Alive, connected, and collective. So, interactive biosignals. Many of you, we've said about Fitbands, etc. There are some quite complex ones that are out there. This is an artist, Marco Donnarumma, who moves audios and visuals all around himself whilst in these armbands, because they pick up data from his muscle movement, from his breath, from his heartbeat, his blood flow, and he uses that data to shift the audio visuals around him. This is two lots of people, artists, scientists, Yoichi Kaido and Neonode, a Swedish company, who are looking at digital senses, particularly gesture and haptics. And Yoichi Kaido, particularly here, working with actual sound wave transmissions to create hologram images in midair, which he then moves around with his hands. And here, Neonode, who are SME in Stockholm, who are one of the many companies in the world at the moment who are working on mid-air gesturing, which we're seeing coming in. We'll see with our phones, gestures, where we pull our phones in and out without touch, and in gaming. And we'll come in with AR very rapidly around the use of AR. So moving data around you through gesture interfaces. Smart skin circuits are now already starting to come into the market, and linking into woven materials, into patches stuck on skin, which give data at the moment, usually for medical, diabetes patches, sun, you've had too much sun patches, etc. We're seeing this come through very fast, but also starting to replicate touch, give information of different types, vibrate with different data outputs onto your skin. And implants. Now, I work a lot with implants. I'm going to get a drink, actually. Sorry about this. And with implants, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what's happening in the implant scene. There are over 200 medical implants, and I'm sure you all know somebody with a pacemaker, possibly with cochlear implant, deep brain stimulation. These are complex medical implants. In today's world now, many people around the world are having these tiny little grains of rice, which are often implanted into this part of the hand or into the fingertips. Has anyone here got an implant, actually? Anyone in this room? Right, okay, usually one or two people do. We're seeing a lot. These are very quick touch identity scenarios. They're tiny, yeah? And this is an implant here, actually on stage at FutureFest Nesta. I ran this event. This is Jeff Mulgan, the director of Nesta's hand, because he has an implant. And here, he did his just to open his laptop and open his phone, yeah? But they can be used for travel cards. They're starting to be used for direct debits, etc. They give biofeedback of different types. Transhuman and trans-species people are out there. In every city, every country in the world, there's a great group of wonderful cyborgs, yeah, who have been changing the way they are. They don't identify 100% with being a human. They have identification which links themselves to other things. Manel here, who's in Spain, actually, the back of his neck, this is a reactive to the weather. He loves rain. So this actually vibrates into his head when one side when there's cyclone, the other side when it's anticyclone. This is Moon Rebus with implants on the tops of her feet. And she feels seismic activity all over the world, earthquakes, earth movements, and she dances to that seismic activity when her feet vibrate. And here Neil Harbison, who actually has grey eye, where he only sees everything in white and grey, with an actual transspecies. This is moulded properly into his head. He considers himself transspecies. He has this on his passport. He can see the world through a range of vibrations of the head, which link to the colours around him. So he can actually feel the colours of the world out there. So, also, this is coming in a big way in industry and corporate culture. Swedish Rail actually swapped paper season tickets for implants with businessmen about 2 years ago. There's actually over 4,000 businessmen in Sweden now actually have their tickets checked like this on the train, yeah, just in this way. And equally, here I am actually in a Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, where we did another human chip implant party with Sabadell Bank, who are, you know, one of our big banks here, the big Spanish bank, who have already got an implant system for transferring money in and out of your account, doing direct debits, etc. Many of the banks are looking at this. MasterCard are really looking at it, several other places. It's well on its way. So we've got these different bits which are coming together and converging into what will be a San Junipero scenario, where we have the possibilities to transmit data and receive data from our bodies. This is the future of holograms now. I hope this is going to work. Oh, no, I've gone forward one. Oh, it's not going to work. The videos aren't going to work. Hang on. Let me go to here. See if I can get it going. Nope. Right, let's play it here. Oops. So, this is the future of the hologram scenario. Now, this is Voxon Photonics. They're based in Australia. They're doing these types of holograms. They don't have to be... Oh, you can't see at all. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Right, play. It is? Oh, great. It's me that's not seeing it playing. Great, good. So they've got these wonderful holograms. I'm just showing one here, which actually are now... don't have to be in boxes. They're tiny, small still, but they're wonderful. And that's the future of gaming, the future of watching football, etc., will be through these very small hologram scenarios. And this is a piece which is live connected avatars. Now, did that start playing? No. OK, let's go back and let's see if I can get this one. Oh, well, with the sound. Sorry, everyone. Thank you. So, that was a piece called Me and My Shadow, which Body Data Space made for the National Theatre in 2012. And it's linking up London, Istanbul, Paris and Brussels into this large virtual sim where you met the avatars of yourself in those other countries. And in that world, people could move around and make sense of themselves together. So, these virtual sim worlds where you can meet at a distance across time and space are existing. And you may well have seen the recent, just come out, Facebook Horizons advert, which is very different than this, and I don't know what people think of it, but it's well worth having a look at what Facebook of the future will be, which is an avatar-based world. So we're looking back again at this same slide, the actual convergence of where our data selves and physical selves come together into collaborative shared spaces. So we are very much at a point where these technologies can bring us into avatar worlds to share and be together across distance and time beyond ourselves. And we can potentially recreate that San Junipero dream. And in that place, this is where potentially we could have this more liberal scenario where we would not just have gaming scenarios of shoot-ups and kill-em games, but actually look at the love, intimacy, joy, empathy, compassion that major parts of San Junipero put on the table for us, yeah. Although we do have the negative bits we can talk about too. So the one bit that's missing is actually the neural interface side. And this is a new report that's come out from the Royal Society very recently. And this shows the blurring line between the mind and machine, examining in depth to date, to today, what neural interface technologies are out there. Well worth having a look at. But actually the baseline of this is that there are none as yet licensed to be used. And there are no regulations in place. Regulation is way behind all this stuff. Governments take a long time to catch up with the speed of technologies moving forward. So the San Junipero neural interface, the little white dot that goes on here, is not yet there. That's the bit that's still well beyond 2035, as someone mentioned. So, and there's a lot to do there. So one of the big things we have to look at, this is one of the concerns that I have and work on, is that biometrics, which is all these biosignals that I've been showing you, being used from our bodies all around us, yeah, is actually personal data, yeah. We tend to think personal data debate, we know our personal data has been misused, it's our name, our birthday, it's our address, etc., our email address, GDPR protecting, first regulation in the world in place actually around protecting that kind of data. But we really do need to have some personal biometric assets held to us and to be regulated with privacy and selfhood issues. Because actually this invisible data often, which is coming out of our bodies around us all over, and there's loads of it in this room because you've all got phones, yeah, on you. There is data going everywhere, yeah. Actually, this invisible data, bodily-based biometrics and behavioural characteristics, our DNA, our fingerprints, voices, our faces, with gestures, our gait, very important, posture and gait, what Satinder was saying about movement and how we move forward. You can recognise anyone from a gait scenario. Gaze, heartbeat, breath, all this data, once it's converged and processed with AI, actually gives away mass personal information about our behaviours, our moods and our emotions, much valued by the corporates, by the advertisers today, because that is how they will be selling us the products and services that they believe we want to buy. And that links into what you were saying, Alan, about that consumer push scenario, the big data consumer push scenario that we will be pushed towards. So I end with actually a set of questions which are not answered yet, which I'm using in my work all the time. So with our personal biometric assets, who does own it? What rights are there to use it? And who controls the ethical use of it? And as artificial intelligence merges with that, with our human intelligence, how do we ensure that there is a moral and social framework coming into place? How do we get into that debate and have a say on it as such? And how do we ensure that a diverse range of people actually get access to all these technologies? That we actually counteract data bias by having an inclusivity within the gathering and the extension of our digital sides so that we don't have a deepening of the digital divide, because here we're talking very Western world views, yeah, and very Western world access to a large extent. And should we actually have our own personal data dashboard where we actually choose who we give our data to for free, medicine research, climate change research, fine, anonymously given for free, and who we charge, corporates, or who we share with because we're sharing on a group project or whatever. But the main thing to remember is that actually we need to keep physicality there. We've got to hold in the physical and virtual together, and we can enhance ourselves positively. Otherwise, will the virtual become the norm rather than the physical? Plus, do remember, this data debate is very important. It is about you, it's about your families, but it's also about our children and our grandchildren. The decisions we make now in the next 10 years will have significant impact on our selfhood, on our agency and on our identity. Mine.
I think, unfortunately, we don't have a mic which we can move because of the frequency. So now we open to questions. Please raise your hand, and I think I'll just come to you and just use my mic to actually ask a question.
So I can probably make myself heard, I would think. Just a quick question on the economics. So in your big robot scenario where you've got your self-driving cars and your automated translators, and I guess at the limit, the marginal product of labour goes to zero. How does the market work? It's like, who's buying it, right?
Yeah.
If nobody's work has any value, who's getting paid? Where does the demand side of the equation come?
I'm grateful for you for giving me the opportunity to tell my favourite apocryphal story about the future of work, which is in the 1930s, the then owner of one of the River Rouge factory in Detroit, manufacturing Ford cars, turned around to the union boss and said, "Look at he got a very rudimentary automated robot at the time. He said, look at these robots. You know what's best about these robots? They don't pay union fees." To which the union boss said straight away, "They also don't buy cars." So, yeah, I think we see that's a big question. We didn't put macroeconomics into the scenario planning because that would have broken the methodology. We probably do see a considerable fall in the price of consumer goods and public services. Not necessarily that they cost anything anyway, but the other costs that come associated with delivery. But yeah, I don't think we see quite the full Marxist view on the labour value theory, but maybe that's the direction society is going on that. And the key thing about that scenario is it almost gets you to a technological underemployment, post-capitalist society, but it happens so quick that at least at 2035, policy is not caught up. Yeah. So I mean, we the Royal Society of Arts are long-time supporters of the universal basic income, and I think that kind of scenario probably pushes you towards big welfare questions like that. So yeah, I think we probably do go partly down that road, and you might have those conversations we'd expect to be live in that scenario, but as distinct from some of the other scenarios, the social response is not as fully formed. Anyone?
Yes. Well, I was about to ask about universal basic income and your opinions on it. So maybe if you have a different opinion, or if you think that's a feasible solution to.
Yeah. Do I go beyond the company? I mean, the RSA very much.
I meant like the other speakers.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Do you want? Yeah. I was about to go against my bosses.
I think, well, I don't have any strong objections to that at all. I think that it's contested. This idea, as you were saying, Alan, it's very difficult to predict the future. And a lot of the discourse around sort of the future of tech has been not that jobs will disappear in the future. Jobs just there'll be different things for people to do in the future. And certainly in the creative industries, there'll be a lot more work, as we've already seen actually with the rise of Netflix, where you can see Black Mirror is a paradigm example of that actually. And we've seen each kind of innovation that's taken place in the entertainment industry has not led to the decline. So for example, the introduction of photography didn't end painting, or the theatre didn't die when they introduced film, or etc. So I think we can get into this doomsday scenario where we kind of think that everything's going to work as we know it is going to disappear, and I don't think that's quite true. I think Harry Collins actually has some interesting things to say about AI and the future in terms of where jobs, things that machines are great at, which is back to the Ford factory, doing lots of repetitive things time and time again, don't get bored, can keep going forever. And the things that actually make us human and what that really means. So it's interesting in San Junipero that the only profession that we actually see in the real world is a kind of carer, so, the caring professions, which unlike in other TV versions where the carers are robots, actually aren't. They actually are, humans are doing those very important jobs. Which fits in very much with Matthew Taylor's idea of really about this universal empathy, which he sees as being part of this 21st century Enlightenment being this notion, and what we need to win back really is this idea of everyone being able to empathize with each other. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, but yeah.
I've enjoyed the two of you spoke about translating from English into Portuguese, Portuguese to English, and Japanese in English. And I was very happy when I was learning Russian to realize that the correlation of one word in Russian wasn't the same as you had to decide which particular meaning you were going to extract into the other language. Yeah. But there was a whole other set of associations that you had to ignore in the translation. So that you were losing all sorts of things in translation, lost in translation. Yeah. But, and also humor. Like in Chekhov is incredibly funny, but to translate the humor is almost impossible because some of it is to do with rhyming, some of it is to do with second, third, fourth meanings of words. So the other thing I was thinking about, maybe for the students who've not read the story of the blind man and the elephant, read that story of the blind man and the elephant, because perception for me is sensation plus meaning. So with Dolly the sheep, okay, genetically she was the same, she was a copy. So the AI is a copy, but it's not the same as the original sheep. Genetically it was the same, but the sensation and meaning, okay, the sensation, the ability to, our ability to hear, to see, to taste, to smell is limited. Animals can do more of all those things than we can, but the most important thing is the meaning we put on those sensations is also limited by our life experience and the prejudices we've acquired from our upbringing. So our perception of what the bigger thing, which I guess we're really interested in, which is truth, truth is always way beyond what our perception is, because our perception is built on sensation plus meaning, and both of those are incredibly limited. So with AI, okay, you can copy it in one way, but actually it's always going to be a poor copy. There's always going to be enormous amounts that's missing. And that's without even getting into the realms of spirituality and what we are as human beings, really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm certainly happy to address the first point, which is about equivalencies in languages, because that has been debunked many years ago by translation theorists. So that we're not really in that. We know that it's impossible to reach a kind of optimum equivalency between languages, and so no translator, particularly in literary translation, would even strive for that. It's much more of a creative endeavor than anything else. So you're not trying to replicate or duplicate or clone something in one language into another. What you're offering is a different take on that, which is unique to you, which is why if you look at, I don't know, Shakespeare translations that were done in the 19th century in French, and then you look at a contemporary translation, they're very, very different, because language is always evolving and changing. What is useful about the technology, though, particularly if you're working on, I don't know, a 50,000 word novel and you're translating that, is you can forget how you went about translating something early on in the text. So you can lose, so you may translate the same phrase or the same word in a different way later on in the novel, because you've actually forgotten what you did first time round. And that isn't a great thing to do in terms of consistency or a through line. So CATs, the computer assisted translation tools, can be really useful for you to spot those little inconsistencies. So it's a way of sort of working with the technology rather than against it.
I think, just as well, that one of the interesting things about the San Junipero thing is, it is a facsimile of life, and the people who are in it know that it's not real life. There's regular scenes where, I think there's a scene where she's smoking a cigarette and she's like, this doesn't even taste of anything, throws it away. So they know it's a facsimile, but the sort of moral question that they want us to focus on is that better than death and or a lifetime of paralysis and no sensation and that? So, should we do it in those scenarios? He's constructing the strongest possible case for this tech to be seen in a positive light, or this use of it anyway.
Yeah, and also I think what's important there is that Yorkie's life was curtailed very early on as a direct result of being a lesbian. And you know, which led to the car crash and everything else. So it's only really through the virtual realm that she can reimagine her that, and as I said in the piece at the beginning, try to sort of rewrite and relive some of that unlived life that she didn't have.
Fascinated by your last two charts, because I've been involved in writing various codes of conduct under Article 40 of GDPR. And one of the things that's really interesting us now, and this is for social and marketing research, one of the things that's really interesting us now is that it took 5 years to write to GDPR. It'll take another 5 years to interpret GDPR. I mean, that's for sure. And so the whole issue that you raise about the ethical use of, I mean, you talk about personal biometric data, but I would go so far as to say the ethical use of personal data, not necessarily even biometric. And you, on one of your lines, you talked about personal data dashboards, which I assume by that you mean me owning my data and distributing that data. And the paradox here is that potentially it takes so long for regulators to create that type of dashboard or bank or whatever you want to call it, that the capitalist enterprises now are moving very dramatically into that space. So could you speak to that paradox? Because I think there's a real opportunity for business, for people like me in the marketing and social world. On the other hand, people like me writing ethical codes see that as a real paradox now.
No, I have got a slide, but I won't get it out. But actually, you're absolutely right. The regulation side is incredibly slow, like we've been saying, and will take a lot longer to come through. But we do know that there is, from the corporate side, on one hand, this grab of, and personal data including, I'm kind of making a point, it's not just your name, address and email, but that biometric data is part of that too, is actually of some, as I've been pointing out, of huge use to corporates for consumer-led push, etc. But also, there is the odd bit coming through from the big corporates saying, we're not quite sure what to do with all this data. It actually is also a bit of a heavy weight on us, because when we've got to store it, 2 data centres, a big part of climate, 25%, 30% of climate change issues are coming from data centre storage, heat, etc. And 3, they can see ahead and they can see the potential litigations that are going to come up if your data and your personal data does a crime and you didn't do it. So you go, well, that wasn't me, that was my data, and then you're suing the companies that went for it. So Estonia is a really good example of a country that has already put into place a digital citizen, where actually when you're born in hospital you're given a number, and your parents at home immediately put that number into this massive, huge Estonian e-citizen data bank, and puts in your name and everything about you, your address, your parents, etc. And you use that throughout your whole life. It's that digital ID, digital citizen, and you use it for every single bit of your life, so even through your education. It sorts out your college for you, it sorts out your mortgage, everything, and you're retaining all your health stuff, everything, in that one place. You can become a digital citizen of Estonia. They're very happy for people. They want people to go and join them. So, so that's one example of a data.
The reverse of that is social credit in China.
The reverse of that is social credit in China,
and that's
which
where
is
the ethical dilemma.
And that is very much pulling on biometric data. So it's really, you know, to put it simplistically, it depends how much you smile in your life, whether you're going to get a good mortgage or a good education, because you've got to be the good citizen, and play it well. And this is through facial recognition, which we are dealing with. We do have a UK commissioner for biometrics, but he is only really dealing with facial recognition at the moment. But we have some very strong issues we've probably seen. The King's Cross experiment was one of the ones that's come up. Private company taking facial recognition from thousands of people going through, actually around the central St Martin's area, so a lot of students involved, and that being the police allowing them to do that and actually use it. There is nothing to stop private companies at the moment selling your facial face anywhere and putting it into databases, and they are like mad. So I think that Facebook is probably the interesting example in this, weirdly, because when the Facebook crisis hit and we were all suddenly like, oh my gosh, what have they done? And you go to your Facebook account to see how much you put up there. One of the things that they said, it was a few weeks after it all hit, but you've all had the chance to turn off everything to do with your Facebook. The back end of Facebook has 94 different things that you can tick on and off, yeah, which maybe some of us have visited now. I've double-checked mine, yeah, and that is your personal data dashboard for Facebook. So actually, of course we can create a personal data dashboard, which actually potentially should be linked to governments and to identity and to yourself, which we have the choice to say, fine, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, you know, Aldi, whatever, you can use my data to restock your shelves and to work out precisely, and they know, if you buy lemongrass, you will have a cook at home who's a man, and you will definitely have content insurance on your home. That is how precise this is, yeah? You can use that, but you give me £3 a month for that, thank you, yeah, or £5 a month. You know, I don't want these points things, I want the money. I want the money in my account. And then you can say, above that line, anonymously, I am quite happy, as I said, for my data to be used in cancer research, if I'm going through that, in medical research of different types, climate change, different data for good, mass bulk, you know, collective intelligence, which is helping us to solve many problems in the world. And then equally, I can go, I choose to share this data, but only with you, yeah? Or I choose to share this data, but with this group to prepare this panel, all the work groups, etc. And that will be linked to a personal data dashboard which you tick on and off, yeah, and which you control. So I do think it is possible. I think there are examples out there, and I do think that corporate culture's really got to look carefully at how much they take on. And I do think unless we get a personal data dashboard in some way, we will have an identity crisis within 20 to 30 years because we won't know who we are. And part of us, big parts of us, will be owned by other people.
The politics of this is very, very difficult, though, aren't they? Because, I mean, I remember in the noughties, the Labour government at the time tried to bring in ID cards, which was, you know, fiercely resisted by civil liberties groups for very understandable reasons, but would have been would probably, in all certainty, been a necessary step to protect civil liberties in this iteration of society. So, and to move to the Estonia system, that's what you would have needed to done. So, you know, it's really, really difficult. And you know, I have a journalist friend who has tried to take advantage of GDPR to acquire his personal data, try and create a data map of himself and all the companies. And he started it in July, and he still hasn't finished it because, you know, he's on the phone for being held for like 14 hours by, you know, whoever's got his data on. Actually, most of the data, to be fair, most of the data he has acquired is completely nonsense, to the point where they think he's 50 years older than he is and stuff like that. But still, it's, you know, the kind of, I think the way he describes his vision of the future is like an airport where you run through a series of processes where you can, if you want, object on civil liberties grounds, but it's so difficult to do that the convenience cost is just not worth it, and so you go along with the process. And that's really the kind of the direction of travel that we're going in, and regulation has to be so clever to balance the risks and the future risks, as that case of identity card shows. So yeah, just a counsel of despair really. I don't really know what's going with it, but it's tough.
I mean, there's, you know, France has just gone for ID with facial recognition too, literally in the last couple of weeks. So we know Amazon are going to be using handprints to pay. So you know, whether it's a nation or whether it's corporate, this biometric data is going to be pulled from us in many different ways. So one of the things I think is good at the moment, though, is seeing how younger generations, including many of you here, are not getting caught in the kind of giveaway that we all got caught in very easily in the Facebook scenario. And I can see this in my 15-year-old and his friends who are actually working, as probably many of you are, setting up multiple independent servers where they work in small groups. They're not going to the big platforms. They're creating their own independent server scenarios, which takes me right back to the mid-90s when I was at Backspace doing independent server work in the early internet days, yeah.
I mean, Hong Kong at the moment shows that that people will will politically and socially as a response and a resistance, that there is a tipping point where they will catch on, and they will and political forces, pro-democracy forces, will work out coping mechanisms to resist the. But I mean, it almost feels like to get out of the airport, you have to get to a situation that is that bad before that kind of resistance becomes a mass consciousness.
So we have time for about 2 to 3 questions, please. See a hand here?
Thank you. Thank you. I'm just thinking about what you said, Ghislaine, about keeping the distinction between virtual and physical, and it's important to keep that for ethical reasons. And I've been following the transgender versus feminist debate quite closely, and it seems to me that one of the things that's happening with biomedical changes over the last few decades is that I guess it's partly to do with that and partly to do with politics around sexuality and gender, that the physical and the virtual are kind of very blurred even without all of this technology, and it's very difficult now to say for sure what is biological and what is virtual, and identity is absolutely caught in that, what is a woman, what is a man, and we're all floating around trying to work out the ethics and the politics of this, whether we know it or not. Oh, that's it.
I think it's very important what you say, and we are at a point where our diversity, from actual, maybe the most extreme cyborg person on the planet, right through to the most normal, natural person, which is not existing. We know everyone's different. Even in this room, we're all very different, and there's nothing which is normal. The range there is now of human beings of different types, is going to grow bigger and bigger, and we're going to need to be much more accepting of the width of what people want to be, who they just are, in different ways, virtual and physical, cyborg and human, whatever mixed. And that, I think, has been, I'm glad to see that happening in many ways, and I think things like the Paralympics have helped massively to shift, our view of disability, for example, as something which is disabling, holding back, to actually to look at the kind of superpowers that can come through. We may in the future have a normal, natural Olympics, a Paralympics, which is more using the enhanced body side, but also we potentially will have the drug ones, which we haven't talked about really, the brain memory pill side. So, and doing that to the body, the drugging of the body. But what I think is really important in diversity is that in different cultures it's thought about very differently anyway. And Yoichi Okaido, who I showed in one slide, I did a talk with him about, and he was talking about diversity and inclusion in the Japanese scenario, so coming back to Japan, and his viewpoint was very much looking at diversity and inclusion, including young people, old people, and robots. And that was the inclusion, that's the mix that has to be actually, and if they're fighting to accept within Japanese society for a variety of different reasons of the integration of that. So.
There was someone over there. Yeah, please. Sorry.
So you mentioned that digital citizen in Estonia, right? And don't you think that when you have, like, there's a good side that you have all your data and that you are in charge of distributing that data, but also because it's data, it's quite open to manipulation and could lead to that data being abused by any party that potentially wants to. And then Alan mentioned that protests in Hong Kong are a good example of how people have a tipping point when they realize premise of that is some level of anonymity. I'm pretty sure if all those people were accidentally scanning their IDs in their hands, like on the streets, there would be much bigger persecution and much smaller incentive to actually fight for the way of life. So that when that digital citizen affects your whole life, as in education, mortgage, work life, that's kind of a danger as well, I think.
I don't think there's no solution, I think, being
I think
offered.
we
We're
were just-
putting forward
we
ideas.
Were just wrestling with it, really. I mean, I think, you're exactly right. If a totalitarian party took over in Estonia, it's trouble time. I think the point I was making about Hong Kong really was that they've got to a situation there where they, not so much that there's been a tipping point in their attitudes to democracy and China, but more the way the protest is manifesting itself, and with a kind of consciousness which knows that they really cannot swipe their cards on the tube, they can't show their faces at any demonstrations, and that kind of, like, I can't think of another example where that sophistication of understanding about how data is a weapon against you has, I don't think is another example. But I'm worried that it has to get to almost a Chinese style of data powerlessness before people react in that way.
I think, I mean, this reminds me of President Putin earlier this year declared the end of liberalism, didn't he? Which was, I think, very much off the back of some successes, some great successes of his involvement in the US election, Brexit, you know, which clearly Facebook were, and, you know, Cambridge Analytica were, well, we know it, it's kind of been proven that we're closely allied to all of that world. So I think these threats are ever more, but I think you kind of have faith in human nature. When I see the Hong Kong stuff happening on TV, it does give me more optimism, cause for optimism that you know, people can quickly
Don't think they're going to win.
Subvert the facial recognition and find other ways. I don't know. I don't know if that's. Yeah, let's see.
I mean, they are subverting it, and I don't have. There's that wonderful video I've seen on Twitter or something where the girls are using their long hair. Have you seen it? Where they're pulling it forward and weaving their hair in front of their faces, and then just making space for their eyes. So they're using their hair as masks to stop facial recognition, and very, very ingenious. A lot of things that are happening.
Well, look at the effect of one Swedish schoolgirl has had on the world, and today in London and all around the world. So I think groups can have significant effects and to cause social and political change, and we need to have faith in that.
But I guess there's a question for liberalism, and it's that, you know, my view on liberalism is that, a bit like Churchill on democracy, that, you know, it's the worst system in the world apart from all of the others. And what else is there, you know, really? But I think the question for liberalism at a geopolitical level posed by Putin in places like China is that there's not a sense of confidence that you perhaps had in the 1980s, that when you were facing down a different type of totalitarian threat, that there's almost a sense that the free exchange of ideas and the open society is actually a weakness when compared to the brute geopolitical battle with China. And actually, if you are prepared to be authoritarian when it comes to human rights, and you are prepared to not respect individuals, then you don't really need to worry about the sort of niceties of AI and the ethics that go with it. You just use them for power in a Hobbesian sense. And I don't have a good answer to it, because it does seem like China is quite effective at, or is quite advanced in AI and using. And part of the reason it's got to that state is not just its economic power; it's also its sort of you know, lack of concern for human rights and data protection and things like that. So, you know, I guess the only thing that you then have is what you said, is faith in people, and maybe the ability for people to not take that kind of stuff lying down.
I mean, Satindra. I was just going to bring Satindra in because AI and Society as a journal has been going since the 80s, hasn't it? So in terms of looking at AI, artificial intelligence and society as a whole, this isn't a new debate, no. This is something
No,
you
it's a debate that's been going on way since the early 70s, and then really heating up in the early 80s. Sorry, I spoke about rhythm. I didn't speak about anything else. But yeah, no, the issues that you're all raising and everybody here is talking about, and Ghislaine is on our journal. She's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, the concerns back. It's interesting how discussions shift, but the underlying things remain the same. It's about your rights to your data, how data is used, what is data. In the early days, it was data residing in expert systems, but that was all databases. It's just not the actual technology. Fundamentally, the issues haven't changed. We were talking then about work and the future of work, talking then about rights. But I think what's so interesting now is this virtual and physical, and the interesting issues that raises. But I think what you've done is you've brought it down to the level of data, and said that even there we have to really think very, very carefully about data.
No, and I think that actually just thinking back to your question that you asked about ownership of data, whether it's owned by yourself in the personal data dashboard or whether it's owned by many others through different corporate or different systems.
Yes.
One of the key things to remember is that the one positive of biometrics is that it is potentially very useful in layered encryption. So you're unlikely to access particularly specialist data about yourself, yeah, and definitely not others, without, you might have a PIN number, but you'll be definitely using your fingerprint, your iris, possibly your breath and your heartbeat as well. It will be layered encryptions to get to data, which and the more important or secret or personal or whatever that data is, the more layers of encryption you can have in place. So,
I just want to say one thing. You mentioned Harry Collins. And Harry Collins, if you don't know his work, he's really worth reading. He's a rare person. He's been thinking about the issues around data, information, knowledge, skill. So he's basically I suppose he's the main figurehead of the study of the sociology of scientific knowledge in this country. And he says that the limits of limits of our concern around everything being made explicit, limits to the reducibility, the limits to automation, the limits to machines, he says, is culture. And that is fascinating, that he says that is something that cannot be made explicit, that cannot be reduced to data. So, even our bodies, the way we move, the way we think and move with our bodies, that shapes the way we form and shape culture, there's something essential there that we don't need to worry about that being taken away from us in any way. There was something I wanted to say. It's just gone out of my head.
So almost in San Junipero, the most difficult technological challenge to achieve is to absolutely get the 80s fashion sense and the gadgets and everything exactly right, because it's going to be a little sort of not culturally literate facsimile of it.
Yes, exactly. There's something actually that.
Well, I was 3.
I was there.
Yeah. I was just thinking, Erin Manning, she's an interesting writer. I suppose she could be called a posthumanist in some way. Yeah. And she says something rather lovely. She says, a body is a field of relation out of which and through which worldlings occur and evolve. And she says that body is more than human. You know, we exist in an ecology of which we are part. And I think that's, and she says the relational field is the most important. This is what, you know, you're all saying, that at the end of the day, how human relations, believing in the human is going to be very, very powerful, because we are part of we shape the relational field. So I take comfort in that, actually.
But I would like to ask one question just on the San Junipero to everyone. And do you think we should, if we could, all go to San Junipero after we die? Would you choose it?
It's very tempting.
It's really difficult, isn't it? It's pretty dark.
Show of hands. Show of hands.
There's a fuck it, why not?
Yeah, why not?
I mean, we can get a raise of hands. Who would choose to go?
I wouldn't.
No.
Because I
Okay.
would be afraid to get stuck.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there are little hints that you can get out, actually.
Yeah.
Like there's a bit where she's about to jump, and they all suddenly start getting really triggered by that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Glitches.
Yeah,
Yeah. What if you get caught in a loop glitch?
There's a power cut.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
but it is based on your own memories, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
actually, presumably, San Junipero is a totally different place, even in the 80s, for each one of us, depending on where our 80s was or what we're remembering of it. And even if we remember it properly, because it's going to be taken from the memory bank, which we know is, we quite often shift in the way we want to see our memories, yeah?
I thought it's representation of 2002, which I'm a bit more familiar
Yeah,
with.
I
It's
think
just terrible.
it invokes a lot of sort of the early computer games, doesn't it? Like Space Invaders and that sort of.
Brilliant. I think if there is some burning question, please raise your hand, but we're pretty much out of time. Okay, go for it.
Just
one last one.
Black Mirror, she had an accident when she was 21. That's why she was young in the San Junipero. If someone had an accident as a 6-year-old or something, to say, would they be looked there as a 6-year-old in their dream?
No,
always
because
young.
yeah, they all seem to be young, and it's interesting that part of the attractiveness, it seems, of the sales or the therapy is that they can plug you into your nostalgic time of choice, because the character Kelly is actually alive. She's having it as it seems to be some kind of therapy for dementia or something like that.
Yeah.
Dementia
But
therapy, yeah.
she's definitely not 80 or in San Junipero. She's back to being 22 and back to being actually being able to choose a more open sexuality than she was able to in her life. It's really interesting.
Yep, you can
You can be whatever you want.
Yeah, and it seems like they all wanted to be under 30, because you look at those. Well, that's a difficult one. So I'm quite happy being over 50 now. So you know, it's not necessarily for me.
I'm definitely happy in my 30s than I was in my 20s. But would I choose? I think I probably would be tempted to choose as well. The power of nostalgia. There's a whole debate and the power of nostalgia. I thought it was quite interesting. See it, politics.
Perfect, brilliant. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone.